At a certain point in a fighter's career, they may be deemed as overrated. Now, overrated carries a pretty negative connotation, but the bright side for these fighters is they can go out and prove me wrong. Just go win some fights. It's easy as that. And they can do that because this list is only carrying current active UFC fighters that are currently ranked in the top 15 of their respective weight class divisions. We're not talking about old guys. We're not looking in the past. We're not looking at guys that haven't been active like Conor McGregor. He's not going to be on this list. Sorry to spoil your party. He's not on the list because he just hasn't been active and he's not ranked. But this list is pretty diverse. It carries some fighters that are undefeated, some guys that are past their prime but still getting rated as high up in the weight class, and a lot of in between. So 10 fighters, let's get down to it and start it off with number 10, Muhammad Mokaev. I already touched on it. This guy is still undefeated. He's 11-0 in his professional career. He's 6-0 in the UFC. So all he's been doing is winning. But the problem that I have with it is he hasn't really looked good doing it. And he's supposed to go out there and smoke his competition. He went to a round 3 with Malcolm Gordon. He was a minus 1,400 favorite against Malcolm Gordon. Jimmy Flick submitted Malcolm Gordon in either the first or the second round. Jimmy Flick made easier work for Malcolm Gordon than Muhammad Mokaev. And Jimmy Flick is not good. So that was a disappointing performance. The one after that, he goes to a round 3 with Jafal Filio. He picks up the round 3 submission, but he nearly gets his knee shredded off as a minus 1,000 favorite. So once again, he's supposed to go in there and smoke his competition. A minus 1,000 favorite means you have to put $1,000 on Muhammad Mokaev's money line just to return 100. That's a massive favorite. You're supposed to go in there and roll through your competition. And he went somewhat close, round 1 or 2. Round 3, nearly gets his knee shredded off, battles through it. That's the upside for Mokaev. The guy's got heart. Another fight against Tim Elliott. He's down 2 rounds to nothing. 2 rounds to nothing. Tim Elliott is a crafty veteran, but he was a minus 400 favorite in that spot. That's a fight that you're supposed to dominate. You're down 2 rounds to nothing, and then he finds a round 3 submission. So this guy has shown that he can battle back and pull off late finishes kind of just out of nowhere. And it almost seems like, why aren't you doing that earlier in the fight? I don't know what it is. And then his last time out, a 29-28 win against Alex Perez, a fight that everyone was just super low on because he didn't really look dominant with his wrestling. That's what he's known to do. He was a minus 350 favorite. He's supposed to go in there and win pretty easily. It was a close fight. Arguably could have went to Perez. But Muhammad Mokaev, I believe, for how hyped up he is a little bit overrated. Because I've seen some comments when they announced the Manel Kape Muhammad Mokaev fight. They're like, how could you ever bet against Mokaev? Mokaev really ain't that good. He's got one good skill, and that's just wet blanketing you. And other than that, he don't really got much. His stand-up is okay. His takedowns really aren't even that good. But once he gets on you, it's tough to get him off. And I believe he is overrated. But he is not crazy overrated. That's why he's number 10. Let's move on. Number 9, Curtis Blaydes. There's not a lot of explanation here on the screen, as you can see, compared to the last one. All I did is throw up his record. And the main talking point here is you're a heavyweight in the UFC. The number one thing you have to be able to do is handle heavy-handed punchers. And that is something Curtis Blaydes has almost never been able to do. His losses, Sergey Pavlovich, heavy-handed puncher. Derek Lewis, only thing he's got is heavy hands. Francis Ngannou, same thing. So he's losing to guys that have very heavy hands. And then you look at his wins, they're not the biggest punchers. I mean, maybe you could say Jairzinho Rozenstruik is the biggest puncher that he beat, but or I guess maybe a Mark Hunt. No, someone like that. Overeem, sure. And what it comes down to is Curtis Blaydes has been in the UFC for a long time, and he's been in the top 10, top 5 for a very long time. That people think he's just this massive killer. But to me, I think he's overrated because he hasn't gotten over that hump. Every time he's been on these, you look at the screen, every time he's been on a win streak, right? He's got 4 in a row going up into the Ngannou fight. He gets knocked out in the first round. He wins 4 in a row going into the Derek Lewis fight. He gets knocked out. Derek Lewis gets the interim title fight. He wins 2 in a row against trash competition. He gets a gifted win when Aspinall blew out his knee. And then he fights Sergey Pavlovich for a number 1 contender spot, basically, and he gets knocked out. So it's like every time he's about to get over that hump, he loses. So I don't really think he's one of these elite heavyweights that'll go down in history. And he's been doing it for a long time. And honestly, his last fight against Jailton Almeida, I wasn't impressed. I can't be impressed with that performance. Like, he was getting ragdolled in the first, and then round 2, Almeida doesn't have quite the explosiveness anymore. Doesn't pick him up right away. Curtis Blades just lands a couple hammer punches, and Almeida is like, "This has never happened. I'm gonna get out of here, fall on my back, and you can have this win." So I've never been a Curtis Blades guy. And a lot of these rankings here, it's really nothing personal, but I just never been a Curtis Blades guy. I don't think his hands are powerful. Like, the only guy, look at the record. The only guy he's put out on his feet is Chris Daukaus. If you look at the method of victory here, right? Hammer fists. Almeida shooting a takedown, he hammer fisted him. Knee injury on Aspinall. Then Chris Daukaus is a right cross. So finally he knocks somebody out with his hands. You're a heavyweight, bro. You're a heavyweight. Jairzinho Rogas strike. Decision. Volkov, decision. Just spam takedowns. Dos Santos lands knees. Abdurakhimov, ground and pound. Willis, decision. Overeem, elbows in the guard. Like, he doesn't really have anything in his fists other than a Chris Daukaus knockout blow, which pretty much everybody on this planet might have at this point. So, Curtis Blades, number 9. And we move on. Mateusz Gamrot. Now, if you know me, I'm not a big Mateusz Gamrot guy. And I really wanted to put him lower. He's number 8 because I think he's overrated. I think his overall, or at least his ceiling, I think is overrated based on, number 1, his fight style. Number 2, his abilities other than wrestling, okay? Nobody loves to watch a Mateusz Gamrot fight. But he is 7-2 in the UFC, in the lightweight division, which is a tough division. The problem with that, he's in a lot of close fights. And one of those wins, as you can see on the screen here, a leg injury over Rafael Fiziev. So that takes away one of those wins. Number 2, a split decision against Jalen Turner. A fight that he was just crotch sniffing. Very easily could have lost that fight based on damage. Number 3, the decision against Arman Tsarukyan that he won. Some people think Tsarukyan won. I tend to lean that way, but Gamrot did get his hand raised, which is a win that ages pretty well. So, I mean, he has some good wins. But the problem is, I think his skill set is a little bit overrated for what the UFC wants. The UFC knows they can't have him as a champ because his fight style is so bad. It's so terrible for the audience to watch. Like, I was watching the Gamrot and RDA fight live in person. People were having side conversations. It was like there wasn't even a fight going on. Nobody wanted to watch that fight. And there was literally one guy in the crowd. He was from Poland. And he was screaming his head off. Everybody was looking at him like, bro, chill out. This isn't exciting, whatever. Like, sit down, bro. He went from a backup title fight. He was the backup for the title fight between Volk and Islam 2 in Abu Dhabi to then fighting RDA on the prelims of UFC 299. UFC does not want this guy to be champ, and he's overrated as far as what he can do in the UFC, in my opinion. Number 7, Paddy Pimblett, another guy that is undefeated in the UFC. He's 5-0. Look a little deeper into those 5 wins. Those first 2 wins he got have a combined record in the UFC of 2-6. Then he gets a win against Jordan Levitt. Not a bad win. Finish win. Rear naked choke. I think he isolated the arm. Pretty nice win. And then he gets to jump up against Jared Gordon. Now, Jared Gordon, I would rate probably top 30, maybe top 25 lightweight in the UFC. Not a bad fighter whatsoever. But everyone knows Jared Gordon won that fight. Jared Gordon won that fight. So that's a loss. Should have been a loss for Paddy Pimblett because the judges gifted him that decision. But he gets the win, so then he's 4-0. And the UFC gives him Tony Ferguson, who is on a 6-fight losing streak at that point. And Paddy does what he wants to him because Tony is an old beat-up man that can't do anything in the cage anymore. He just can't. So then Tony loses now 7 in a row, and Paddy moves to 5-0. And I really wanted to put Tony on this list, but I don't think anybody really rates him, as good anymore. I really hope not. But Paddy at number 7 makes sense to me. He's 5-0 in the UFC, but Tony Ferguson, 2 bums, and then a gifted decision against Jared Gordon. He's going to be fighting Bobby Green pretty soon here, so I guess maybe he can get another win. But Bobby Green is also 37, 38 years old, so they're matching him up right. See that with a lot of these guys. They match him up right to try to get those wins. They didn't want to give him Moicano. Paddy Pimblett said he wanted Moicano. Moicano said he wanted Paddy Pimblett. But for some reason, the UFC gave Paddy Pimblett Bobby Green. That might tell you something, right? It might tell you something. Number 7, Paddy Pimblett. Moving on. Yair Rodriguez, number 6. Did anyone realize that Yair Rodriguez is 4-4 in the UFC since 2017? So in the last 7 years, this guy is a 500 fighter. And he's ranked number 4 in the featherweight rankings right now. Now you look at those 4 wins, and it almost looks worse than being a 500 fighter. The first win was a buzzer beater against the Korean Zombie, a fight that he was losing. He was about to lose the fight, and then Zombie gets elbowed in the head from Yair with 1 second left. So that very easily could not have been a win for Yair Rodriguez. And he gets a decision win over Jeremy Stephens. Sure, I guess. I don't think Stephens won another fight after that in the UFC. And he's on a losing streak. So, decision win over Stephens. He then wins against Brian Ortega when Ortega's shoulder pops out. So another one of those wins in that 4-4 record since 2017 is by injury. So he won that by default because the guy got injured. And then to win the title, and this is where his rating goes up. He wins the interim title on the same card that Volk's fighting on. The interim featherweight title against Josh Emmett by triangle choke. Okay, Josh Emmett was coming off a split decision win over Calvin Kattar that was very arguably he shouldn't have lost that fight. So Yair's fighting Josh Emmett, a guy that was like number 6 or number 7 in the featherweight rankings at the time, for the interim title, and he triangle chokes him to become the interim title, the interim champion. 4-4 since 2017, and that was the breakdown of his 4 wins. And then the losses, Brian Ortega in the rematch, Volk, Holloway, and Frankie Edgar. I don't know, man. I think it's a solid spot for Yair at number 6. The real weakness is he got no wrestling game, like 0 wrestling game whatsoever. You put this guy on his back, he doesn't know what to do. Like Frankie Edgar made the guy look like he was about to cry. Moving on. Number 5, Jan Blachowicz. And I might get some shit for this one because Jan Blachowicz is a pretty beloved fighter in the UFC. And it's nothing personal. Nothing personal at all. I like Jan. He's a funny guy. Big dude, big burly Polish dude. Can't really dislike him, right? But Jan Blachowicz is overrated. That's why he's number 5. He won the title, the vacant title that John Jones left against Dominic Reyes. He won that by knockout. Now, we now know that knocking out Dominic Reyes isn't exactly, or it shouldn't be one of your most accomplished moments, right? Just shouldn't be. So he wins the vacant title at the time against Dominic Reyes by knockout. His first defense as the light heavyweight champion is not against a light heavyweight. It's against a middleweight. A middleweight that was dominant at the time, yes, in Israel Adesanya. But a middleweight that did not bulk up at all to go up 20 pounds. I believe he weighed in at like 200 pounds. The light heavyweight limit for a title fight is 205. So I don't think Izzy really cut any weight going into that fight. And Jan Blachowicz just kind of laid on him to win the fight. So it wasn't exactly like a holy shit, Jan Blachowicz just put a freaking clinic on this Adesanya guy. And he looks like an absolute killer, right? No, it looked like Jan was just the bigger guy fighting at his normal weight class, and Izzy was much smaller fighting out of his weight class, and Jan used his size to win the fight. So that's his first defense as the champion. And then he takes on the 42-year-old Glover Teixeira as a minus 265 favorite, and he loses. So he's had the belt for one fight against Izzy, and then he loses to a 42-year-old Glover. I mean, we all love Glover, but you're a minus 265 favorite. You go in there against a 42-year-old, you lose to Glover, and then Glover lost to Yuri, and then Glover lost to Hill. So that loss doesn't exactly age well because he didn't win another fight after that. So since he lost to Glover, he's 1-1-1. Jan Blachowicz is 1-1-1. The only win would be the injury that he got a win from against Alexander Rakic. The loss to Pereira, and then the draw to Ankalaev. So he's 1-1-1 since he lost the title, and the only win being from injury. I think Jan Blachowicz deserves to be kind of listed as overrated at this point. Number 5 for Jan. Move on. Number 4, Kevin Holland. Now, I love Kevin Holland. Okay, I love the guy. How could you not, right? The guy fights all the time. Like he's just consistently active. He promotes himself well, right? But Kevin Holland has kind of fallen into this role of being a rich man's Terrence McKinney, right? We know Terrence McKinney, for a guy that's pretty active, right? A guy that's going to put on a show. He's exciting. He's not durable, but Kevin Holland is very durable. So difference there. But McKinney kind of fights pretty often as well. Kevin Holland fights all the time. In 2020, he gets all this hype for going 5-0, right? He won 5 fights in 1 year, and a lot of them being in devastating fashion, a lot of KOs. But since then, since 2020, he's 4-6. 4-6. Not even a 500 fighter in the last 4 years. He's not even 500. And we look at those 4 wins, right? Alex Oliveira, 34 years old, gets cut right after that fight. The other win, Tim Means, 38 years old and 3 months. You're sensing a trend. Santiago Ponzinibbio, 36 years old and 6 months. And his last win, Michael Chiesa, 35 years old and 7 months. So as you can see, the only guys that he's beaten since 2020, 4 of them are all old and washed up. 4-6 since 2020. At this point, I believe Kevin Holland is overrated just based on the fact that everyone kind of knows who he is now. All the casuals know who he is. He's an exciting guy. He's a tall, lanky guy that's going to be throwing a lot of heat. He fights a lot, so people know him. And they're like, yeah, Kevin Holland's a beast, man. He'll show up anytime. But he's not going to show up anytime and win every time, right? The only time that he shows up and wins is when his opponent's like 34, 35, 36, 37, 38 years old. He's overrated. I love the guy, but he's overrated because he's not really beating anybody good. He's not. He's getting those fights. He'll take those fights, but he ain't beating them. The only guys he's beating are these old guys that he's just, getting a free win in. And it's the same thing with Terrence McKinney. He'll go take those free wins against the bums, try to keep his name up, get those wins. And then once he gets in there with a guy that's on his level or a little bit better than him, he ain't looking good. We move on. Number 3, Paulo Costa. Now, I really want to put him higher on this list, but it's really tough to know because the guy is just not active. He's 1-3 since 2019. So in the last 5 years, he only has 4 fights. But he's only won 1 fight in those last 5 years, and that was to a 37-year-old Luke Rockhold. You got that? 37-year-old Luke Rockhold is this man's only win in the last 5 years. How? How is this guy ranked in the top 10? Luke Rockhold wasn't ranked at the time. Luke Rockhold was damn near coming out of retirement, it seemed like. And that's his only win in the last 5 years? And this dude is ranked in the top 10, and he's going to be fighting the number 1 contender. This guy never held a belt. He fought for a belt, and he got knocked out. So it's not really like Paulo Costa is some legend that doesn't get to play by the rules as the other guys in the rankings. He's not some legend. He's 1-3 since 2019. The only win to Luke Rockhold. How is this guy still getting fights inside the top 5? He loses to the number 3 Robert Whittaker. And the UFC's like, yeah, it's Paulo Costa, man. Like, it doesn't even have to make sense, right? It's Paulo Costa, secret juice, man. This shit is it's great, right? We just love it. Let's give him the number 1 ranked contender, Sean Strickland, right? And then let's give Robert Whittaker, the guy that Paulo Costa beat, let's give Robert Whittaker Khamzat Chimaev. Because Khamzat Chimaev still hasn't beaten a real middleweight. But since Whittaker beat Costa, we were going to do Costa versus Chimaev, right? But nah. Let's do Whittaker. Whittaker, the guy that beat Costa, to face Khamzat instead. And then let's give Costa a jump up. Even though he lost, let's give him a jump up and face Strickland at the number 1 contender spot because it's Paulo Costa. This dude's last finish, everyone looks at him. He's jacked up. He's ripped up, right? Super explosive dude. But this dude's last finish was in 2018. Almost 6 years ago since this guy finished I can't say that. Pause. Almost 6 years since this dude ended. How do you say this without sounding sus? It's been almost 6 years since Paulo Costa either knocked out or submitted his opponent in the octagon. That's ridiculous, man. It's ridiculous. Paulo Costa's overrated as fuck. Number 2, Marlon Chito Vera. Another guy that I respect. Family guy. Tough guy. He's had to work for everything in his life. But at this point, got to tell you how it is. Marlon Chito Vera is overrated as fuck. Okay? The only reason he got that title shot against Sean O'Malley, and I'm sure he probably knew it in the back of his mind when he was fighting that fight. When he was getting kneed in the face, Sean O'Malley was putting a beating on him. He was probably thinking, damn, I really only got this fight because I had a little fluke win over him. What, like 6 years ago, 5 years ago? Somehow landed my toe onto his perennial nerve, shut it off. And here I am, 5 years later. I'm in a title fight, something I've been working for my whole life. And now I realize I didn't deserve this, man. I got gifted this title shot because O'Malley's putting it on me. And when I say you got gifted the title shot, it's because you lost to Corey Sandhagen a year before that. And how does Corey Sandhagen not get the title shot over you? He got worked. He got worked by Corey Sandhagen for 5 rounds. And then he goes and beats Pedro Munoz, and then he gets a title shot. It is just ridiculous. If you say that's not a gifted title shot, you're crazy. You're crazy. And then you look at his last 5 wins, they're all against old guys. Like Chito Vera might be the senior killer, man. Munoz, damn near 37 when he beat him. Dominic Cruz was almost 37 and a half years old. Rob Font was nearly 35. Frankie Edgar was 40 years old. And Davey Grant was 35 years and 6 months. So all those guys, those are his last 5 wins. His most recent 5 wins, those are the guys. Those are the guys. I don't know, man. And if you look at a lot of those fights, he's losing them. He's losing them until he wins. Like the Frankie Edgar fight, he was losing until he knocked him out. Dominic Cruz, he was losing till he knocked him out. Pedro Munoz fight, it was arguable that it could have went to Pedro Munoz. And then he gets a title shot. Like, I don't think Pedro Munoz had won a fight, or he had won the fight against Gutierrez or something like that. Gutierrez wasn't even that good. You know, like Munoz wasn't on like some tear. It wasn't like, oh my God, you beat Munoz. Holy shit, you need to fight for a title. No. Marlon Chito's he's overrated at this point. Like, he's so flat-footed. He never uses his wrestling game, never uses his grappling game. It almost looks like at some points when he's fighting, there's just no game plan. Like, he's just there just taking shots. I don't know what it is, but you know, there's a lot of diehard Chito Vera fans, which is great. But Chito at this point he's so overrated. If you look at the bantamweight rankings, there's a lot of guys that would beat the shit out of him. And I think he's ranked number 4 right now. Like Song Yadong has a win over him. Jose Aldo has a win over him. They're all ranked below him. Like, Chito Vera should not be ranked number 4. He's overrated as fuck. Number 1 brings us to Colby Covington. Now, I really debated this spot because I don't know where people rate Colby Covington at this point. Like, is he overrated or not? But part of me just kind of feels like he's still overrated. Like, he might be one of the most overrated fighters in UFC history. Like legit in history. But we're talking about right now. Colby Covington, the part that makes him overrated and why he's number 1 is because he himself overrates himself. And I don't know if that's just part of his shtick, but he overrates himself to the max. Like, a big part about being a fighter, like, I see a lot of fighters that they're more self-aware with, like, where they're at in the rankings, or, like, what they need to do to get a title shot, or what kind of matchup would make sense going forward for them. Like, maybe they need to take a fight back in the rankings to prove themselves again. Not Colby Covington. Okay, I don't know if it's his shtick or not. Might be. Most likely is, but the self-awareness of, like, bro, you need to fight back in the rankings or do something. Like, you need to fight somebody that isn't 80 years old. You know, like you got to do something. This dude's got 2 wins in the last 5 years. 2 wins in the last 5 years. And those 2 wins were against a 38-year-old Tyron Woodley and a 37-year-old Jorge Masvidal. So once again, a guy that's beating up old dudes. And outside of those 2 wins were title fights. So Colby's claim to fame has always been his close fights against Kamaru Usman. Kamaru Usman is Colby is somewhat of a tougher matchup for Kamaru because Kamaru can't rely on his wrestling, but Kamaru is just a step ahead in the striking that it's somewhat competitive when they're on the feet, and then the wrestling just kind of equals out. So it's Kamaru beats him, but he doesn't beat him by complete domination. First fight, broke his jaw, knocked him out on like the 5th. That was a good fight. Second fight, a little bit slimmer. Like Colby, you just have the wrestling to back up against Kamaru Usman, and then on the feet, he's just better than you. So the claim to fame of those 2 losses in title fights really ain't much to hold on to. And then his last fight against Leon, he looked terrible, but then he claims an injury. And could be cope. I'm sure it's real. I'm sure he, broke his ankle. But now you're at a point where you may not be rated as highly as what you think you are. You need to go back and fight somebody in the rankings, and there's a lot of guys calling your name to fight you. Sean Brady, Gilbert Burns, Ian Gary. They're all willing to fight you, but it doesn't seem like you're willing to fight them because they might not, or they might be too young for you, too dangerous for you, not have a big enough name for you. Like at this point, Colby, you need to come to your senses and fight somebody back in the rankings that isn't Wonder Boy Thompson, who's 41 years old and consistently loses to wrestlers. It just makes sense. He only takes fights against washed fighters. That's what it is. That's why it's written down here. He only took fights against washed fighters. Tyron Woodley at the time, pretty washed. Jorge Masvidal, hella washed. Those are his only wins. So he's only going to take fights outside of title fights. He's only going to take fights against washed fighters that he knows he could probably beat, or at least aren't in their prime. And then, other than that, he just loses title fights. So Colby Covington takes the cake for number 1 most overrated UFC fighter in today's time. And that brings the end to today's video. I appreciate you for watching. As always, like and subscribe if you enjoyed. Comment down below your thoughts. Until next time, Hey Job Picks here. We out.